Thanks for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital in manufacturing. In this episode, Jonathan and Jen are joined by Eric Smith, our Vice President of Services at Razorleaf. Eric shares his insights from his 20-plus years experience in overseeing service projects. He has seen firsthand why some projects fail and why others succeed. You might think many challenges are because of the software or the technology, but surprisingly, that has little to do with the equation. Things like organizational culture, alignment, and planning are what separate those projects that succeed or fail. If you are planning an implementation project for any enterprise system, insert your acronym here, ERP, PLM, MES. This episode will help you uncover the many things to consider and help you plan for success. Let's listen in with the team.
Welcome back to Stay Sharp, everybody, the podcast about all things digital related to products and manufacturing. My name is Jen Ferrillo, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jonathan Scott.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're talking about some of the reasons that PLM projects can fail. And we've spent a lot of time in previous podcasts on the topic of PLM, walking through how it differs from PDM, whether or not it's something just for engineering. Spoiler alert, it's not. Even how to get started. Most importantly, we've talked about how PLM is one of the biggest enablers of the digital thread. But like most things in life, PLM projects don't always go quite as smoothly as we'd like. And sometimes the best way is to learn from mistakes. So on part of our guides to educate and inform, we'd like to walk you through some of those. And joining us today to talk through some of that is Eric Smith. Eric is our VP of Services. And as such, he's been involved in hundreds of PLM projects. He's seen them go smoothly and, well, not so smoothly. So, Eric, before you can get started, can you give the listeners a little bit more background on yourself and the work you do?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me today. Appreciate being here. Hopefully some good discussion on this important topic. So, background is came out of school with a degree in mechanical engineering and did that as a product engineer at a valve and fitting company for a few years. And then at that company, I had an opportunity to start to get involved in the systems side of things with a CAD and PLM selection, and then the subsequent implementation of that system at that company. That was a great first experience for me in this world. I'm not gonna say the years. It's hard to imagine it was that long ago, but it's been a minute.
Oh, come on. I did in a previous episode. I told people.
All right. That would have been 1997 and 98. So
ouch.
A little bit. And through that experience, I was able to meet Eric DeBell. So that's Razorleaf's president. So that's how I got to know Eric a little bit when I was still working somewhere else. And after the successful completion of that project, is when Razorleaf got started, and I was able to join Razorleaf shortly after it was founded in 2000, which is also hard to believe it was that long ago. But and over the last 23 years being here, I've been able to have a lot of roles. You know, we started off with just the four of us, and so doing a little bit of everything, consultant and all the roles, and then had opportunities to start a few of the different product groups that Razorleaf has been involved in over the years in different capacities. And which gave me the ability to work with different people, a lot of different companies, a lot of different industries, as well as some different technologies. And those projects, as Jen mentioned, there have been quite a number of them that I've been either directly on or seen over the years, especially in the role that I'm in now as a VP of Services, which has been, I think, since 2017. So a little bit of a touch on most of our projects at this point, some big, some small. A lot of industries and a lot of business circumstances, a lot of business problems. And to be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about being the subject matter expert on an episode for why PLM projects fail. But I'll take it in good spirit. And I've seen a lot of how they succeed, and we've seen a lot of how they've gone sideways to varying degrees over the last 25 years as well. So thanks for having me.
To that point, Eric, right? You can bring the stories about how projects have failed, and we've stepped in to try and help after the fact. None of our experience about how they failed, right?
That's right.
Well, we don't have any of those.
That's right. That's right.
Never.
And I want to say another word about that too. Jen, us kicking this episode off. I do think, we're focused on PLM projects and how they can fail, what can go wrong, that kind of thing, and how you can avoid those problems. But I'll say I think this can apply more broadly to people doing enterprise system projects, right? It doesn't have to just be PLM, right?
Sure.
You can apply this, I think, to PDM, to MES, to ERP, to other enterprise systems. So, some of what we'll talk about, I imagine, will touch specifically on PLM, but a lot of it's pretty broad. It's good stuff to think about, or at least I'm hoping it will be.
Yeah, I agree. And another way to view the whole topic of why PLM projects fail is how to avoid your PLM project or your enterprise business platform project failing. These are the landmines to avoid.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning of how projects can get off on the wrong foot from the beginning. I mean, Eric, what do you see there when people are just planning projects, just getting started, some of the mistakes that can be made or things that you can do to be on the right foot when you're starting with a project like this?
Yeah, I think some of the early things are alignment, right? I mean, some of the bigger struggles we see is if an initiative is really just departmental or a certain person within a certain department, but there isn't buy-in from other tangential departments that are going to be impacted later. Maybe it's someone from engineering trying to drive it. Maybe IT hasn't bought in. Maybe the CFO isn't quite sure how the money's getting spent. I think there's a lot of things that just need to be done internally ahead of time to build what the need is. How are you going to get some return? What are the costs going to be? Making sure how it's going to impact everybody else along the path. Some of those are some of the steps that seem straightforward, but are hard to do because people have to step sometimes outside of their zones and their departments to have those conversations. And some folks want to maybe stay a little bit more narrow just in the world that they live. So I think that certainly is one of the big ones up front is just trying to get a breadth of approval, a breadth of buy-in across an executive group.
And you said a couple things there that I think are connected, right? Which is making sure you're clear on the need. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Because that feeds right into, well, who does need to be involved? Who are those stakeholders you need to talk to and make sure are aware or involved or, decision makers that need to be part of an approval, those kinds of things. And if you don't connect those, you might miss something, right? I thought I talked to everybody, but I missed the fact that this is supposed to deliver something to manufacturing. So I need to go talk to them. But you kind of got to figure those out hand in hand, I presume.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and certainly, and because it could end up being a bigger effort or a smaller effort, but at least then comprehensively what that needs to look like for the company as a whole, instead of just something that's going to have an impact later, but not know about it up front.
Yeah, I know we've seen people. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one thing that I don't know if everyone thinks of this in these terms or not, but when something we developed pretty early, and it's not uncommon, but just to think about three legs of the stool, right? You got budget, scope, and schedule. And up front, the more companies can think about those things and what their limits are on those things is going to be the better off for them. What are the objectives in terms of scope? How are we going to have to fit this in terms of a budget? And then how long is this acceptable to happen? And the more that can get commonized across the stakeholders, the better.
Yeah, I know I've seen that challenge related to stakeholders and talking to the right people just early on, even when you're sort of forming the idea of the project, where people aren't aware of what's going on in other parts of their business, right? And somebody steps on somebody else's project or, gets in somebody else's rice bowl in terms of, well, no, we own that over here and you shouldn't be doing that. And, that's just a quick way for everybody to get slowed down and confused about what's going on. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one thing that Eric mentioned at the beginning is that a lot of times these projects can start as a departmental effort. And that's a lot easier. That department probably has their own timeline and schedules and budget and things like that. But once you go beyond that, which most of these systems do, beyond a single department, that's when you really need executive, because that's the ROI might be coming from somewhere else rather than the part of the company that's actually implementing it.
Yeah. And I think something that has increased over the years as well, that early on this wasn't as big of a thing, but more over the years, you see things geographical as well. Maybe a geography thinking in terms of we're just going to worry about this here. We're not going to worry about the division we have over here, the division we have over there. And that can really cause some problems later because they may have a little bit of different way to operate with bills of materials or with manufacturing plans and things like that the PLM content is going to need to deal with that may not be accounted for if we don't think globally at that point in some companies.
That reminds me of one I remember seeing previously, right? Was people not realizing when they went to do something in a certain geography, oh, there's an executive somewhere else who's got an objective that says we need to operate globally, right? And the instant they see this little project over here, they're like, wait, hold on. There's something bigger at work. And it goes right back to that stakeholder point you brought up. Make sure you're involving the right people and talking to the right folks up front.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're talking globally, because it's not just a different version within the same country, but if you're talking globally, there's different cultures and different ways of doing things, different styles of management. So I think those are all things to consider when you're talking about project management and coordination as well.
Well, and Jen, you brought up another good one about, if it's departmental versus the whole company, that kind of thing. One of the things that comes to my mind there is just understanding, if you're the person who's involved, who's trying to champion this or move it forward, understand where you fit in the overall org chart, right? Are you going to need to go influence a bunch of people above you to get the kind of support, Eric, you just named? Or are you at the top of a department and you have some autonomy and control and budget? Now, all those things you just mentioned are the three-legged stool, right? But where do you fit? Are you going to influence people, or are you kind of the driver?
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing for people to do. I mean, that honestly is part of we have to figure out when we start working with a new company, right? We, part of the sales and figuring out the strategy and how to work with people is trying to figure out where those are. And the more that company understands that themselves and can help us and help a partner like Razorleaf understand that, then the better off everyone is. I mean, those are good things to understand up front. And also, then, if you're the head of something, having a good understanding of who's going to be involved, what kind of, capacity it's going to take and things like that kind of transitions into another risk. But understanding that these projects do take time, right? They take effort, and being aware and knowledgeable of the kind of resources that you're going to need to commit up front as well, and kind of getting that buy-in from some different areas. Especially, ones where we've seen where maybe engineering drove it, but IT, you can't do these projects without IT support and buy-in. These things run on computers, so understanding what those capacity demands are going to be as well.
Yeah, I can think of a perfect practical example, right? Engineering's ready to go. They've lined everybody up. They're ready for the system, and then IT's like, no, I'm sorry, we don't have anybody to install a server for another 6 months. I mean, that's the kind of thing you're talking about practically, right?
And it happens. I mean, because they have their own demands and their own schedule, and if everyone's not on the same page and singing from the same sheet, then that kind of thing can happen all too often. Yeah.
I'm going to set you up with a softball here. How should people know that? I mean, how do they, like, our customers, right? Folks listening to this who are not in our shoes, doing this kind of thing. How can they know? Like, how can they figure these things out we're talking about, which are some of the gotchas early on?
Well, I feel like the softball should be why you work with a partner like Razorleaf.
There it is. Out of the park it goes. Nice work.
Yeah. But even before a partner selection, I mean, a lot of it are it's the hard slogging miles that have to happen in communication, right? It's the things that none of us want to do. None of us want to have the up and down conversations and horizontal conversations that need to happen because, maybe I don't like this guy over here or this lady over here kind of gets on my nerves when I bring something to her. And it's hard work. It's hard work to have the right conversation. So even ahead of working with somebody else, getting people in the room and having a conversation about it and just talking out and asking, helping understand what the demands are going to be and constraints are going to be is big. And then, working with a partner, I mean, hopefully, whoever people work with can guide in some of this. Change adoption, OCM type of stuff is big. It's certainly undervalued in most cases, and I think we'll talk about probably more as this conversation goes on. But even that starts then is understanding what the impact of change is and who needs to know, and trying to plan that across the different groups that are going to be involved.
Yeah, and that was the softball I was setting you up for. But I mean, I'll broaden it, right? So it doesn't have to be quite that targeted. To me, I think it's ask somebody with experience. That's what you're getting at, right? Like even if it's internal, if you're in engineering and you want to run a PLM project, go to IT and say, When was the last time we did a big enterprise project like this, and how did it go, and what did we learn, and who do I need to talk to and work with, and get some advice from someone who's done it before. If that's external, great. If it's internal, great. But just get some help, because it's a big thing, and it, like you said, it's the hard work of talking with people and building a team to do something like this, because you can't do it on your own.
What's interesting to me is listening to you talk. Both of you talk. It's about the technology. It's about the project, but it's also about your own organization. So it's really about understanding your organization, who needs what, and how to get things done. I mean, at a very basic level.
Yeah, and I think a comment you made early on was really astute, that you can stick whatever alphabet soup you want into this conversation. Everything we've talked about so far, you can use whatever acronym you want in there. MES, PLM, ERP, the conversation is the same. And I think, Jonathan, the point you just made is chances are someone else has done one of those alphabet soup projects. Go find them. Say, how did it work here? What can I learn? What can I learn from that? And how can we do it better the next time around? So absolutely.
Yeah. And Jen, you made a good point, which is so far, we haven't really talked about anything early on that gets in your way related to like the product. That I picked the wrong product. Like, no, we're not focused on the technology. I think that's a really important point about this conversation overall, right? Is how do these projects fail? How do they succeed? The technical part isn't the biggest piece, at least not initially. So I don't know. I mean, Eric, am I seeing something wrong there? What do you see that can get people in trouble that is technical or more technical?
I mean, it is the minor part. We've worked with a number of different tools over the years, and, we tend to pick those based upon some technical merit, but typically upon the kind of company that it is, and we want to work with good partners. But, they wouldn't be in business if they didn't have a tool that couldn't do the job.
Right.
I think a big thing there is trying to find, as a company looking to buy PLM, is understanding the vendors, going to a show and meet some people and see who has the character of your company, who has a personality like your company, whose product vision and strategy lines up with your vision and strategy. I think those are the more important things. The tools typically are going to be able to accomplish the goals that you need to accomplish, unless you have some very niche requirements that maybe one versus another is going to fit. But yeah, I think the technology is the minor part of this.
Yeah, that could certainly get us off onto some rabbit holes, and I'll throw in my own 2 cents worth that, technical bake-offs between products. I don't see a lot of people who a year, 2 years after the fact come back and say, I sure am glad we did that. That was the most important piece of our PLM project. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that, but I've heard lots of people say things like, well, like the advice you just described. I wish we'd talked more, wish we understood more about the vendor themselves, not just the tool. The clicks didn't matter as much as, did they have coverage? Are they focused on my industry? Those kinds of things. So what you're saying makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I learned that lesson early. Had a great example of this at Swagelok, where I initially worked. We had a selection team that went through and made a recommendation to buy something that's from a company that's no longer in business. And we had an awesome VP there. I don't know if we use names, but Dave Peace was his name. Really good, smart guy in that category. He said, "No, we're going to go this way." And the selection team was like, "Oh, okay," it was right. That was picking a vendor that was the right time, the right place, the right personality, the right match, and it was a success. So I think that really kind of teaches you the lesson of you got to make sure the X's and the O's line up, the I's and the T's dot, but in the end, there's more than just those things.
So we've talked primarily about failing to plan, right? That's one of the biggest problems, is to not knowing your organization, not knowing your needs, how you're going to demonstrate the return on investment, not knowing the players and how to cooperate. But now you start getting into solving the technology problem, right? So taking a look at what are some of the things there that can cause you to stumble as you're going out of the gate.
Yeah, I think along the lines of what we talked about in the first section, I think there's a continuum here as well. Once you start to look at technology, maybe you pick the vendor up front, or maybe you don't. I think the next step is who you're going to do it with. Right? Most clients are probably not going to look to tackle a PLM project on their own, or an ERP or an MES project on their own, unless they have a long storied history in it and are comfortable with a big staff to do it. So just like they got, companies have to pick a software vendor, they have to pick an implementation partner. I think that's the next step in the process, is for similar guidelines. You got to find, meet with the people that you're going to be interacting with, meet with the leadership of the partners. There are good partners around. Razorleaf, is one of them. That's one I've chosen to hitch my cart to, and I'm pretty happy about it. I wouldn't be here 24 years later otherwise. But you got to get to know people. You got to find people that you trust and believe they can do what you need them to do. And I think that's really kind of that next step, is picking someone to jump into it with.
I think implicit in what you're saying is you don't have to use the software vendor themselves to implement their tool, right? I mean, and this is, I'll make another shameless pitch for us and folks like us in the industry, that, independent service providers are folks who can add value. Sometimes they bring different competencies, different skill sets, that sort of thing. But point being, you have two decisions to make: the software, and then who's going to help you implement it, or are you going to do it yourself? And it's not, shouldn't be just of course I'll have the software OEM do it. That's not always the best fit. Sometimes it is, but not always.
Yep, agreed.
No, I mean, you're right. It's not just their technical skills, right? But it's also alignment with the type of delivery and how they deliver, how you mesh with each other. And I know that's one of the things that we look at as well, is ensuring that our partners, or rather the companies that we work with, that we provide technology and services to, kind of align with the way that we do things and value the way that we do things.
Yeah.
I think values are right, but there's another piece too, Jen, that I think we're talking about project failure without trying to be too specific. But I know I've seen projects where it's a good partner, good value match, but just not the right skill set for what they need. Somebody's trying to implement and migrate from an old system, and the folks implementing, maybe they know PLM in general, but not that tool. Or maybe they don't do data migrations, but they do implementations, and you need somebody who can handle both. Or, you didn't think that you needed a partner to do that other piece. So just kind of having a swing and a miss on, for your project that you have in mind, whatever it is, I need these skill sets. It's almost like product selection. Did you check all the boxes, the X's and O's line up and everything? Did you make sure you got that right? And that's not always simple, but I think that's another place people can go off the rails.
I think you're right. And it's not just, sometimes it's not even one partner, right? You might have different partners that have different specialties. So, I know I bring my husband into this probably more than he would ever imagine I would talk about him. But it's, he's a general contractor, right? So he does a lot of different things, but he will bring in a plumber or an electrician or what have you to do the high value stuff that, like, I can do this level, but you need to be digging a trench in the basement. I don't do that.
Right.
Yeah, something that I don't know that was something for us to talk about, but Jen, you bring up a good point there too. And I don't know that Lord of the Rings trilogy is appropriate, but there should be one ring to rule them all, right? We have seen challenges with working with a handful of partners and being your own general contractor, which in real life is usually a bad idea as well. We've seen that not be a good idea in this also. I think if you do need some different skill sets, that you're going to pick a primary partner that doesn't have, and you need to find some skill focused partners. Pick one partner to kind of rule the roost, to make sure that schedule lines up, that requirements are met, and things like that. Otherwise, no one's going to own it, and someone needs to own it. Yeah,
right. And some of these projects are technical enough. The last thing you want is a bunch of folks pointing fingers at each other, talking technical jargon, saying, well, I couldn't do this because they didn't do that. And, and you're just left pulling out your hair going, I don't even understand what you're talking about.
Right. Yep. You want your partners to play well with each other, play nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a big part of that.
A parallel to that too is, when you do start getting into it, is trying to find that right balance between project management. Jen, you mentioned project management. It's super critical to these projects. It's very critical to have an internal project management at the company that's running the PLM or the whatever the technology is, that can work with a PM from a partner. And sometimes, if the two are out of alignment or one is underestimated and, maybe it's not happening as much, the PM at the company doesn't have as much time to focus on it or things like that, that can be a real struggle because you can then creep into the things we talked about up front. Communications can start to suffer, upward visibility can start to suffer, coordination of the different departments can start to suffer. So, I think, having someone that can keep the partners aligned is important, but having someone at the company that can keep all the players aligned is critical to the process being successful and a risk.
Yeah, and that bridges that gap between something you brought up earlier with OCM and organizational change management and project management, right? And those two can be related and connected. And I want to throw you a curveball now. You got a softball earlier. This time it's a curveball. So on the project management front, like you just said, we've been doing this a long time. Is there a right way? Is there a right way to manage these kinds of projects? Waterfall, Agile, Scrum, you name it, right? I mean, what do you see there? Is that a place where people mess up?
Yeah, kind of two different questions. I mean, is there a right way? I don't know that there's a right way. There are right ways. And it is certainly something that gets messed up. And that could definitely be a partner criteria as well. If you're a company that is 100% agile and you're looking to work with a partner that's 100% waterfall, that's going to be a problem, right?
Right.
I tend to, in our experience, and I think it's where a lot of people end up falling, I think the right ends up being in a combination. I think a lot of just the black and white, one direction or another, tends to not work too well. These projects don't align well with some of that. If you didn't have the three legs of the stool and budget could be whatever and scope could be whatever, then yeah, one method that may work out. But I've not found those yet. So
right.
So you got to be able to draw boundaries, but you need to be flexible within those boundaries. So I think the keys to success there are. I know we just released recently, Eric put out the, our values video, which was a really good video. And there's part of that is flexible, but disciplined. I think if I had to say one thing about PM success, it's that. I think that is a good mantra, right? PMs need to be disciplined. That is what they're there for. They're there to keep things march along, to keep the legs of the stool balanced. But in these projects, things aren't all pre-known. Things don't go the way they're supposed to go. And so there has to be some flexibility there as well to be able to adjust and to move and to get the pieces realigned.
So in the beginning of what you said, you touched on something really important, I think, and that is the culture of the organization to start with, right? I mean, there are multiple right ways to do a project like this. So you can have a little agile, a little waterfall, a little other methods. But, how are people on the customer side ready to work? What do they know? What are they comfortable with? Like, do they take tasking on a Scrum board, or would they rather have a due date and a task and report their percentage complete? And I think you rightly say that's got a lot to do with it. How do you match up? How do you line up? Not just, this is the way it has to be.
No. Yeah, in this world, this is the way it has to be. It doesn't often work out well, right? Engineers don't like to say this is the way you're going to do your job. PMs don't like to be told this is the way you're going to manage your project. This is the way it's going to be is not generally a well accepted answer.
It's not well accepted, but it might be. I might challenge you on the engineers not liking to say that. I think they do like to say that on occasion. So, matter of fact,
be told that.
Yeah, exactly. Not be told that.
I'll use the right pronoun there. We love to say it, but we don't like to hear it. Yeah,
I think you're right. And along the lines of engineers, et cetera, we've spent a lot of time talking about planning and choosing the right partner and the people aspect of it, which is a critical piece. I think it's a piece that doesn't get talked about often enough or deeply enough. But I can feel the engineers listening and being like, yeah, can you get to like some of the hard tasks? Someone like the details for crying out, like give me something meat here. So like some of the other challenges that could cause PLM projects to fail, like for instance, data, the type of data that you're working with, the type of data that you have, quality of your data. How does that affect PLM project success?
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I think a couple we should definitely talk about are data integrity, data quality. and also delivery expectations. So let's hammer through both those. So one is, poor data quality. Everyone, unless you're just the new business starting out, you're going to have data that has to get migrated. You're going to have legacy stuff that has to be dealt with, and everyone's data is perfect.
Sounds about right.
As far as they know.
Yeah. Except everybody's data is terrible. I mean, that is an unfortunate reality of life. We can even stuff data we've seen in coming from existing systems, changes happen to those systems over time. Who is managing that system changes over time. Work practices change over time. Things get broken. These are ones and zeros that don't end up coming aligned the same way all the time. So one is over assuming the quality of your data. If you assume the data is good, you're setting yourself for cost and disappointment changes later. So I think that's a big one, is to really go into this with an open eye on what your data looks like, and maybe even start the process out with some kind of a data evaluation to kind of see what the data looks like and what you may be running into as the project goes along. I think another one is that I mentioned is and this kind of goes a little bit back to Jonathan, your question about PM, and I appreciate you reminding me, Jen, is do you go with a monolithic delivery or do you go with an incremental delivery? I think traditional projects did a lot of monolithic deliveries. We set up a project here, and 2 years later we get some result, and it better work, or else we just wasted 2 years of life and money. And that is kind of the direction that things are going away from at this point. There's still some of that, but not as much. I mean, we really try to find ways, and I think most people at this point are trying to find ways to get incremental, either if it's not implementation, at least some incremental delivery that can be evaluated, so that as the project goes along, you can look at this piece and yes, that works. And okay, let's put that on the shelf. And then you can look at this piece and yes, that's okay. Let's put it on the shelf. And maybe at the end, all those come together into the full recipe, and you get the output, but you've vetted it along the way. So at the end, you don't have to test the whole thing. And now if it doesn't work, you have no idea where along the 2 years that happened. So I think that's a big one as well, is trying not to bite off too much at a whole chunk.
And that concept, though, also gets influenced by where people are coming from, too, right? I mean, to your point, that incremental delivery, that works great in a greenfield. But when it's, this new system's replacing that old system, to your point, you might have to be flexible about that concept, where it's like, well, we're going to try some things out, set them on the shelf, and then wait to integrate them and replace at the end or migrate at the end. But you could still have that philosophy, right? That principle of check it as you go instead of check it at the end and hope for the best.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that we've done in the past with when you're talking about data, right? As you're starting to migrate some of that older data from one system to another, is checking along the way, doing those rehearsals, making sure that, okay, like we made these assumptions. Now we've tested it with this small set of data. How did that go? Okay, well, we got 75% through. Great. Let's tweak it so we can get 90, and then we can tweak that so we can get the 100%. So.
Yep. And the same philosophy goes along with just normal implementation stuff too. Maybe the whole scope is, we're going to do document management, change management, CAD management, bill of material management, whatever managements we're going to do as a part of the project. Let's not do them all and then stick them in place. Let's do pieces. Let's make sure that we have the document stuff lined up the way we want it to. Let's make sure the CAD does it the way we want it to. And maybe you can put some of those in place along the way. Maybe that's not okay, but like Jonathan's point, you can at least figure it out, and this is close. And then we don't have to worry about it while we worry about the next thing, and then package them up as a whole at some point down the road. So
break a complex problem down into simple problems that you can solve and put on the shelf and move on. That reminds me of something else you said a minute ago, talking about data quality. And as we were talking about scope just a second ago, this is something I've seen, and I'm very curious to get your view on this, is people having the wrong target in mind, right? Like, so on data migrations, well, I have to have all my old data, or on, functional implementations. Well, the PLM system does those 12 things. I have to have all those. How often are people kind of, getting off on the wrong track or getting off track by having the wrong target in mind? Something shiny distracting them.
Yeah, I think there's two paths this take that are both risks. two risky paths this can take that can cause problems. And one is what you just said is the new system has to work how I'm used to working. It has to be an exact replacement of what we did before, or it has to be an exact, duplication of what our manual processes were before. That's a dangerous thing. Software systems, we said, will do the job, but the way they do jobs is different. And if you go in with the mindset of, I want it to work the way the old system worked, that can cause you problems, because that new system may have different functionality. You may be giving away something that you could get that maybe is going to work better in the new system, or you may be trying to shoehorn something into something that it just isn't meant to work that way. I think the flip side of that is it can also be a risk is that, listen, we customized the heck out of our first system. We don't want to go that path again, so we're just going to put out of the box in place. But out of the box also isn't necessarily going to cover all the things that you do need it to do. Companies do have requirements for how their system needs to work and how their engineering processes and manufacturing processes need to happen. And so, just blindly saying out of the box or nothing is going to potentially cause as many problems as saying my way or the highway. So I think both extremes can cause problems.
Okay, you're on record. You said customization's fine.
He did say it could cause problems too.
Customization, right? So configuration customization. I mean, it is depending upon the platform you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a very different message depending upon what vendor platform you're talking about as well. So.
And that's a topic I think we've even got an episode on that we might cover, but I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist after you said that.
Yeah, now you're going to start getting me in trouble. You're going to lead me into trouble. Here's what you're going to do.
I think your fallback is the definition of fine is where it's at. It's fine.
Yeah, but it can be healthy. Yeah, I mean sometimes it's required.
So we just talked about scope. And what you're trying to implement, and that can get you in trouble. Here's a finer point on that. What about order? Does that matter when you're doing a big project like this? Like what you put in place when, or do you do migration first or early or late, or like does timing matter here?
I mean, beyond some of the obvious ones, like you can't do a bill of material before you have parts. So I mean, there are some things that sequentially just have to happen, and I think it's kind of hard to do a migration until you have something to migrate it into. So there are some natural order of events that have to happen. But
those are fair. Those are fair, but not always obvious, right?
Not always obvious, and even more nuanced when you start to try to order some of the functional aspects of it. I mean, do I need to do document management before I do part and bond management? Do I need to do CAD before those things? Can I get into program and project management before I do document management? I think there are a lot of nuanced things, and we've seen a lot of companies go a lot of different paths and be successful. I think we would recommend some paths just because it's kind of an easier point of entry in some ways. Getting into document management is probably going to be a little bit more straightforward than getting into some of the more complex things with maybe E-bombs, M-bombs, and stuff like that. So you might want to start that way if you're new to it. But if you know what you're doing and you have some targeted things, starting with like a program management, we've seen plenty of clients start off with, kind of a secondary really aspect of the software and be very successful, and then migrate and move towards other aspects of the tool as well to then continue to get more and more benefit from the platform.
I mean, I think that what you're saying it basically is that in a lot of cases, order does matter, but not in all cases. So we're back to the flexible but disciplined, or disciplined but flexible.
Right. Yep. I do want to hit on something. I don't know if it was where Jonathan was leading or not. I think it's one thing that is a real challenge, and people don't often see it and know how to deal with it. And that is what is the end, and waiting on 100%. There is very little in life that's 100%, and PLM projects are no different. So, I think getting to the end and trying to figure out and draw the line where the end is going to be and is a real challenge. It's a real risk to projects as well in terms of rolling something out. If customers or we're waiting to do 100%, that can be a real challenge mentally. And what is good enough? Is it 80% or 85% or 95%? But there is no such thing as 100%. And the times where we just see something really just outright end up not working that more often than not is one of the primary causes, is not being able to define the end.
It gets right back to something you brought up very early on about, the three legs on the stool, and schedule and budget and scope, right? Scope, clarity of what do I need, and then what's nice to have. I think that can help with the 100% question you're bringing up, right? I mean, and It's a hard problem. To me, that's another area that we've seen people struggle on projects is lack of clarity on scope or ambiguity, and then different stakeholders have different views of what that is. And maybe I'll lead us into another topic, communication about it, right? Does everybody understand that scope the same way? Are they hearing repeated messages about it? Hey, team, we're doing PLM. The focus of PLM is e-bomb management. 2 months later, we're in the middle of the project, team. We're working on PLM, and e-bomb management's up first, right? And if you hear that 6 or 7 times, by the end, when it rolls out, it's very hard for somebody to be like, but we didn't do CAD, because you got the message. But if you heard, we're doing PLM, and then, 6 months later, you're looking for the solution, and you're like, that's not PLM by my definition. We've seen that, right? I know I've seen that.
Well, I think that gets back to something we started talking about early on in the conversation, is that the organizational change management. I mean, name it what you want, carve it how you want. It's those types of things that are important. And the more that can happen up front, the more that can happen in the middle, and the more that can happen towards the end. Say what you're going to do what you're going to do, and then tell them what you did. I mean, all those things need to happen as a part of a project like this. And the less that's done, the riskier everything gets, because they just installed something on my computer and I clicked it and I don't know what to do with that. Well, that isn't going to be a recipe for success, right? That's going to cause a problem. 100% agree there.
Well, and how many times have we seen that, right? Like, you go to do support for end users, you ask them, how's it going, that kind of thing. And, you get that angry person who's just like, I don't know. I didn't even get to go to a training class. I don't know what this thing is. It doesn't work. It's nowhere near as good as the last system. My data's jumped, and you're like, whoa, what happened here, right?
Yep.
Well, I think it's
absolutely.
And I think that's probably one of the easiest things to kind of fall off on the end, right? When you're getting towards the end and you're like, well, shit, I'm running out of time. I'm running out of money. We can handle the training inside, or we can we got that, or you know what, we'll just kind of push that off. But it's one of the most important pieces, because you could implement the best PLM system or ERP or MES, whatever. But if your users aren't using it, and if they're not seeing value, it's not going to keep living. And the whole point of the project was that it be a continuous, it offer continuous value. So that's a really critical piece that's easy to drop.
Yeah, 100%, Jen. And I mean, we see this internally. I mean, we aren't always the best at eating our own dog food when we do our internal IT projects, right? And usually where it's the most painful is where we fall down on educating people on what we're going to do, and then training them how to use whatever we just put in place for whatever it is, whatever system we just did. And not closing the loop on that last end of that last part of the project is definitely a common pitfall.
Well, I think there's a lot of ways that can go south too, right? But to your point, Jen, you run out of money, you run out of time, you shortcut it. That's one. Another one is, I think, just missing kind of the best practice for how to do something, right? And not everybody's necessarily going to know these things, but I'll share a little bit of dirty laundry for Razorleaf. One that we learned along the way, now a while back, but along the way, is training someone on the clicks in a software. What does that button do? What does that button do? What does that menu mean? Is not the same as training someone on how to perform their work, how to perform a business process using a tool software, or a collection of tools, right? And at the end of the day, people want to get their job done. That's the kind of training you need to provide, is help them get their job done. That's going to make them adopt whatever tools under the hood that they're using. But just showing them, hey, here's what the save button does. Okay, what am I supposed to do with that? When does that fit in my day-to-day work? I don't know, right? So
you're exactly right. That's where the frustration and the anger comes in. It's like, great, I know that. I can work the software. How do I get it to do my job? And then if you're spending continuous cycles trying to reprogram your job, or rework your job in this new software, people will just give up.
Yep.
And those are opportunities too. That feedback, whether it's training, ongoing training, whatever it might be, or support, right? You mentioned taking care of the thing long term. Those are all opportunities to hear, how does it really work? Because, I know from our side of the desk, I'll be the first to admit, you're never going to get it right. Your 100% answer a minute ago, Eric, right? You're never going to implement one of these systems perfectly so it lines up with a company's business processes exactly right and it gives everybody exactly what they wanted. It's never going to happen, right? So how are you going to pivot, adjust, tweak, improve, enhance? How are you going to do that? I think that's a place where people can run into problems too. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think there is something too that made me think of that's a little bit tangential, but that's within that system, that's within that user base. But something we haven't talked about too is, I think, is forgetting about or underestimating the need to integrate with other systems as well, right? There's a lot of inputs anymore. There's very few things in a business at this point that happen in isolation, that happen in a silo, right? There's data over here and there's data that needs to get over there, depending upon what we're implementing and what kind of processes we're doing. I think there's, neglecting to train your people, but neglecting to figure out what kind of information your people need to do the jobs that they need and where that's going to come from, and getting those things in the system that they're going to be working in is important as well to remember. And something that's can be hard to remember, to think about up front. You maybe think about it later when they don't have what they need, but certainly something good to add to the thought process.
Yeah, you're right. We didn't mention that early on, but I do think that's important. At least it's something that is important in projects that we often work on, is talking about business process early, right? We talked about stakeholders and needs and making sure you're thinking about all that up front, but that planning piece needs to involve business processes too. What am I going to impact? What does it mean about data flows, integrations, things like you just said?
Yeah. It's funny. I can't help but think that there's going to be somebody listening to this podcast and they're going to say, well, I thought they were going to talk about why stuff fails. And I feel like we've been talking about how to avoid the things that fail and how to make it succeed. So if you're the person that's thinking about how projects fail, just think of all the things we just talked about in the negative. And there's your answer, right? That's right. Which is how I normally would do it. So this is a little bit uncharacteristic for me to talk about the positive side of things. I'm like, don't do this, don't do this. But yeah, I thought it's funny. You never knows what goes on in the back of your head.
Well, I think it's a good way to, as we're looking at our time and realizing we're about out of it for today, it's a good way to summarize, right? So if you just went down a list of why PLM projects fail, you fail to plan, you choose the right part or wrong partner, you choose the wrong technology, you don't have alignment, you don't communicate. What did I miss? You don't integrate.
You don't control scope.
You don't control scope.
You don't control budget, timeline, those things, right?
Right.
Yeah. Wait for 100%.
Right.
Yeah. And you fail to think about it circularly, right? I have to support it. And at some point, it's going to end a life and I'll do this process again, right? So you don't even think about the whole breadth of things. That's another place you can go wrong.
Well, and I think when we're talking about out of the box and customization, you don't think about the cost of upgrades, right? Mm-hmm. Customization is great. It aligns perfectly with exactly what we're doing. Only now it's super customized. And to move from this to the next version, even of the same software, God, that's going to be painful.
That's right. I was able to make a business case for buying this thing to start with, but I got no business case for paying for that upgrade.
That's right. So there you go. That was a good summary of the things not to do, things that actually cause the PLM project to fail. However, if any of our listeners are out there and you have points that you think we missed, no, my PLM project failed because of this, or what about that? Reach out, let us know. Reach out to us on LinkedIn, on any of the social media platforms. Subscribe to the podcast. And if there's anything else that you want to hear about, topics we haven't touched on, let us know. We want this to be part of a conversation. So I want to thank Eric for being here. Really appreciate you.
I just wanted to say, hey, Eric, this has been a lot of fun. Interesting conversation, stuff that we've certainly seen over the years. So thanks for being here for this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Very valuable. And until next time, everybody, stay sharp.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. We appreciate you. If you have any questions for our podcast team or have an idea for a new topic for our team to cover this year, please send an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. We would love to hear from you. Also, leave a comment on our post and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, stay sharp.